Chosen one, listen closely. The town that swore they would forget your name is now bolting their doors because you walked back through the gate. And why? Because the same people who pushed you out are the ones now cutting through back alleys, pretending they don't see you standing right there in the open. Let that land for a second. You didn't come back with an army. You didn't come back with a speech. You came back the way you always move, quiet, steady, unbothered. And that alone put the whole town into a panic they can't explain to each other. Nobody warned them this was coming. That's the part that's eating them alive right now. They spent years telling themselves a version of your story where you never returned, where the road you walked out on swallowed you whole, where your name faded into something people mentioned with a shrug and a change of subject. They built an entire piece around your absence. Streets rearranged themselves without you in the picture. Conversations moved on. Doors that used to open for you got repainted, relabeled, given to someone else. And every single one of those doors just heard your footsteps outside them again. Here's what you need to understand before we go further. This isn't a comeback story about revenge. This is a story about what happens when a town builds its whole comfort on the idea that someone is gone for good, and that someone simply proves them wrong by showing up. You didn't storm the gates. You didn't need to. Your presence alone did more damage to their false peace than anything you could have shouted. That's the part they never saw coming, and that's exactly why they're running. Think about how long it takes a town to fully believe someone is gone for good. It's not one conversation, it's years of small agreements, nods across counters, a shared understanding nobody ever wrote down, but everybody obeyed. That agreement became the floor they built everything else on top of. Your school, your job, your friendships, your reputation, all of it got reassigned, redistributed, quietly folded into the lives of people who told themselves they deserved what used to be yours. And every one of them believed the floor would hold forever, because why wouldn't it? Nobody comes back from where they thought you went. You should know something else before this goes any further. None of what's unfolding in that town right now needed you to plan it, orchestrate it, or even want it. You didn't come back with a strategy for chaos. You came back because it was time, because the years away had done what they needed to do, and because a place that once made you feel small no longer has that kind of power over you. Everything that happens next is simply the natural weight of truth, finding a place to land after being held off for far too long. Before we go deeper into what your return actually triggered, hit like and subscribe, Chosen One. Not as a favor, as a signal, a way of feeding this message back out to the people who need to hear it before their own return happens. Now let's walk through exactly what's unfolding in that town right now, block by block, door by door, because what you're about to hear isn't hype. It's happening in real time, and they can't stop it. Number 1, they mapped an entire town around your absence, and you just erased the map. They didn't just move on when you left. They restructured everything around the fact that you weren't coming back. New routines built on old sidewalks. New favorites picked to fill the space you used to take up. New stories told to children and newcomers about who mattered and who didn't. And your name was quietly left off every version. That wasn't neglect. That was architecture. They engineered a town that functioned on the assumption you were permanently erased from it. And every plank of that structure depended on one single condition holding true forever, that you would never walk back through that gate. You just walked back through the gate. Think about what that means for a structure built on a false floor. It doesn't creak. It doesn't warn anyone. It just goes. One footstep, one shadow crossing the town line, and the whole design they spent years reinforcing is sitting on nothing. They didn't prepare a plan for your return because, in their minds, planning for it would have meant admitting it was possible. And people who silence a possibility instead of preparing for it always get caught flat-footed when it happens anyway. You can feel it already, can't you? The way certain eyes won't meet yours. The way certain conversations stop the second you're close enough to hear the tail end of them. That's not curiosity. That's the sound of a map being redrawn in real time, badly, by people who never expected to need a new one. They built their whole town on the bet that distance was permanent. It wasn't. And now, every assumption they made, every position they took, every comfortable lie they repeated to make your absence feel earned, all of it is exposed to a fact they can't undo. You're standing on the same ground they thought they'd claimed for good. Here's the part that should sit with you the longest. You didn't come back angry. You didn't come back loud. You came back exactly the way you left, which is the single most terrifying thing you could have done to them. Because it means nothing they did actually changed you. It means the years they spent believing their version of the story worked meant nothing at all. The map is gone, and they're the ones standing in the middle of the street holding a blueprint for a town that no longer exists. Picture the confidence it takes to build an entire social order on someone never returning. It's not caution. It's not neutrality. It's a bet, placed quietly and repeatedly, that the odds would always favor them. Every bet like that eventually meets the one outcome it never priced in. And this town just met theirs, standing in the middle of their own main street, in plain daylight, with nowhere left to look away to. There's a certain kind of arrogance in believing a place can be permanently rearranged around someone's absence. It assumes the absent person has no say in the matter, no timeline of their own, no version of the story that doesn't end with them staying gone. That arrogance is exactly what makes this moment land so hard for them now. They didn't just misjudge you, they misjudged the entire premise their town was standing on. And premises built on someone else's permanent silence rarely survive contact with that silence ending. Number 2. The first person who saw you froze mid-sentence. Somewhere in that town, there was a first witness. Maybe it was someone behind a counter, someone crossing the street, someone standing on a porch they thought was far enough from the road to stay unnoticed. Whoever it was, they saw you before anyone else did, and in that half second, their whole face changed. Not surprise, recognition, the kind that hits somewhere behind the ribs before the mind even catches up. That person didn't finish their sentence. Whatever they were saying to whoever was standing next to them just stopped, mid-word, because their body understood something their mouth hadn't caught up to yet. You were back. And within minutes, that silence traveled faster than any announcement could have. Word doesn't need a headline in a town like that. It needs one frozen face and a phone in someone's hand. Ask yourself why that first reaction mattered so much. Because it wasn't fear of a stranger. Strangers don't make people forget their own sentences. That was fear of a name they thought they'd finished dealing with. Fear of a chapter they told themselves was closed. And the moment that first person's face gave it away, the entire town's carefully rehearsed composure started to crack from a single point outward, exactly the way glass does. You didn't do anything to that person. You didn't approach them, didn't speak to them, didn't so much as glance their direction for longer than it takes to walk past. And that's the detail that will keep replaying in their mind longer than anything else. You didn't need to do a single thing. Your existence in that space did all the work. That's not intimidation. That's inevitability walking down a sidewalk at a normal pace. By the time the second person saw you, they already knew. By the time the third person saw you, the whole block had rearranged its posture without a single word being spoken. That's not a rumor spreading. That's a town remembering something it spent years trying to forget, all triggered by one person who couldn't finish their sentence. There's something almost poetic about how little effort it took. No confrontation, no announcement, no dramatic entrance staged for effect. Just a person walking at a normal pace, minding their own business, and an entire chain reaction set off by nothing more than a face they recognized too fast to hide their reaction to. That's the difference between manufactured fear and the real kind. Manufactured fear needs noise. Real fear only needs a glimpse. Number 3. Every door that used to slam in your face is now locked from the inside. There was a time doors closed on you without a second thought. No explanation offered, no discussion had, just the quiet, casual cruelty of being shut out by people who assumed you had nowhere else to be and no way to matter. Those doors closed easily back then because nobody on the other side believed there would ever be a cost. Look at those same doors now, locked, bolted, curtains pulled the second your shadow crosses the street. The people who used to slam them in your face without blinking are the same ones checking twice before they step outside. That's not coincidence, that's consequence. Arriving exactly on schedule, the way it always does, once the story finishes catching up with the people who thought they'd outrun it. Here's what makes this so uncomfortable for them. A slammed door used to be an act of power. It said, "You don't belong here, and we get to decide that." A locked door from the inside says something completely different. It says, "We're afraid of what happens if this door opens." That's not power. That's the absence of it, dressed up to look calm from the outside, while everyone behind it holds their breath. You never asked for an apology from any of them. You never needed one. But watch what's happening now without you lifting a finger. The very structures they used to keep you out are being repurposed to keep themselves in, hiding from a version of you that exists mostly in their own imagination, built out of guilt they never processed and excuses they never had to test. They thought a door was a wall. It was never a wall. It was a hinge, and hinges swing both ways eventually. The ones who learned that lesson too late are the ones bolting theirs shut right now, and every lock they turn only confirms what you already knew walking in. This was never about whether you could get through. It was about whether they could survive what happens when you didn't need to. Notice something else about a locked door. It doesn't just keep someone out. It admits, silently, that whoever locked it believes there's a reason to be afraid. You never had to say a word to prove that fear was justified in their own minds. You just had to keep existing, keep walking, keep being exactly who you always were, and let their own locks tell on them. A person with nothing to hide from doesn't need a bolt on the inside of their door. Number 4. The town called an emergency meeting they didn't know how to run. Somewhere behind closed doors, the people who consider themselves the ones in charge are scrambling to figure out what to say about your return, and none of it is coming together. You can imagine the room. Chairs pulled too close together, voices talking over each other, everyone trying to sound composed while their hands give them away. This is what happens when a plan never accounted for a variable. They had contingencies for almost everything. What to do if a rumor got out of hand? What to do if someone challenged the official version of events? What to do if the wrong question got asked in front of the wrong crowd? What they never built was a contingency for you simply existing in their town again, calm, unhurried, and completely unwilling to explain yourself to anyone who didn't earn the right to ask. That's the meeting happening right now, not a strategy session. A room full of people discovering in real time that every strategy they'd rehearsed assumed a stage you were never going to walk back onto. And the longer that meeting drags on without a plan, the more obvious it becomes to everyone in the room that there isn't one. There was never supposed to need to be one. Ask yourself why a group of grown adults would need an emergency meeting over one person walking down a street. The answer isn't that you're dangerous in the way they'll say out loud. The answer is that you're inconvenient to a story they built their entire social order around. And inconvenient truths don't stay quiet in small rooms for long. You're not in that meeting. You don't need to be. Every voice raised in there, every idea shot down, every uncomfortable silence that follows someone asking, "What if they're not here to make peace?" is doing the work for you. They called that meeting because they're scared, and nothing in that room is going to make the fear smaller. If anything, the meeting is only teaching them how much they still don't understand about what actually brought you back. Somewhere in that meeting, someone is probably suggesting they should just talk to you, clear the air, get ahead of whatever they think you might be planning. And someone else is probably shutting that idea down fast, because talking to you directly would mean finally facing the one conversation they've spent years avoiding. It's easier to hold an emergency meeting about you than to hold one honest conversation with you. And that alone tells you everything about how little courage actually built that town's version of your story. Meetings like that always reveal the same thing eventually. Nobody in the room actually agrees on what happened back then, only on the story they've been telling since. And a room full of people improvising an explanation for a crisis they never planned for tends to expose exactly how thin their unity always was. You didn't need to break their alliance. You just needed to exist close enough that the cracks in it became impossible to ignore. If you're feeling this settle in your chest right now, drop 77 in the comments below, chosen one, and let this message know exactly who's still watching, still listening, still ready for the rest of this story. And if this is landing the way it's supposed to, consider dropping a super thanks on your way through. It keeps messages like this reaching the people who need to hear them before their own return happens. Number 5. The story they told about your leaving just collapsed at the town line. Every town needs a story to explain the people it lost, and yours was no different. They told a version of why you left that made them the reasonable ones and made you the problem. Maybe they said you couldn't handle it. Maybe they said you were the one who walked away first, the one who gave up, the one who chose to disappear rather than face what was really happening. It didn't need to be true. It only needed to be repeatable. And it was repeated. For years, probably. Passed along at gatherings, softened at the edges, adjusted slightly, depending on who was listening, but always landing in the same place. You were the reason, and they were simply the ones left behind to pick up the pieces. That story did its job. It let them sleep at night. It let them look each other in the eye without flinching. It gave them permission to never examine their own part in what actually happened. Then you walked back through the town line, calm, unshaken, carrying none of the shame that story was supposed to have burned into you, and the whole thing fell apart in real time. A story built on someone staying gone forever cannot survive that someone standing right in front of it. Every detail they smoothed over now has a living, breathing correction walking down Main Street, and corrections like that don't need to say a word to do their job. Watch how fast people start changing the subject when your name comes up now. Watch how the story that used to roll off their tongues so easily suddenly gets clumsy, full of pauses, missing pieces that used to sound so certain. That's not them being polite. That's them realizing the story only worked as long as the person it was about wasn't standing close enough to hear it fall apart. You don't need to correct them out loud. You don't need to demand an apology or a retraction. The story collapses on its own the second reality contradicts it. And reality just walked back into town with its head held exactly where it's always been. Held high, unbothered, and very much not finished with this chapter. There's a reason liars prefer an empty room. An empty room doesn't ask follow-up questions. It doesn't remember details differently. It doesn't stand there quietly making the exaggeration look exactly as small as it always was. Your return filled that empty room without you saying a single word. And every story that depended on it staying empty is now finding out exactly how much it was never built to survive scrutiny. A story only survives as long as nobody in the room can contradict it without a word. You are the contradiction now, standing there in flesh and blood, not as an argument but as a fact. And facts don't need permission to dismantle a lie that outlived its usefulness the second you crossed back into view. Every retelling from here forward will carry a hesitation it never had before. And that hesitation is the sound of a lie finally running out of road. Number 6. Your calm walk down Main Street sounded like a siren to them. Here's what nobody in that town expected. They braced for anger. They braced for confrontation, for raised voices, for a scene they could point to later and say, "See, we were right about them all along." What they got instead was worse for them in every possible way. They got silence. They got someone walking down the middle of their town at a completely normal pace, looking at nothing in particular, needing absolutely nothing from any of them. That kind of calm is unbearable to people who were counting on chaos to prove their story right. A scene gives people something to react to. Calm gives them nothing except their own reflection staring back. And that reflection is showing them exactly how loud, how frantic, how unsettled they've become compared to the person they spent years insisting was the unstable one. Imagine standing in a room, waiting for a storm you've been warned about for years, bracing every window, reinforcing every door, and then the sky simply clears without a single drop of rain. That doesn't feel like relief. It feels like you built all that preparation around a threat that was never coming the way you imagined it, and now you have to sit with the fact that you spent years afraid of something that was only ever going to walk quietly past your window. That's what your presence is doing to that town right now. You're not the storm they prepared for. You're the stillness after it. And stillness after a storm that people expected but never came makes everyone question whether the storm was ever real in the first place, or whether they simply needed one to justify how they treated the person standing in the middle of it. Every step you take without raising your voice is doing more damage to their narrative than anything you could have shouted. They wanted a reason to say you came back dangerous. Instead, they got proof that you came back exactly the way you should have, steady, composed, and completely uninterested in giving them the reaction they were bracing for. Think about how much energy it takes to brace for a storm every single day for years. That's what fearing your return quietly cost them, long before you ever set foot back in that town. And now that the storm turned out to be nothing more than a person walking calmly down a street, all that braced tension has nowhere left to go except inward, curdling into the kind of restlessness that doesn't fade just because the danger they imagined never actually arrived. Number 7. The ones who spread the loudest rumors are the first ones packing their bags. There's always a certain kind of person in every town who never actually confronts anyone directly. They talk behind counters, behind fences, behind screens, building a version of events that spreads faster than the truth ever could, because it doesn't need proof, only repetition. Those are the people who worked the hardest to keep your name tangled in a story that made you the villain. Now look at what they're doing. Quietly loading up cars in driveways, suddenly remembering relatives in other towns they need to visit, taking routes to work that avoid the streets they know you're most likely to walk. That's not coincidence. That's the specific, particular panic of someone who spent years saying things about a person they never expected to have to say those things to their face. There's a reason people who gossip the loudest run the fastest when the person they gossiped about actually shows up. It's not because you're threatening them directly. It's because their whole comfort depended on you never being close enough to hear what they said. And now that comfort has a very real expiration date they can feel getting closer with every hour you stay in town. You never asked for their attention before. You didn't need it then, and you don't need it now. But their reaction tells you everything you need to know about how much weight their words never actually had. If what they said about you was true, they wouldn't be running. Truth doesn't flinch when it walks past the person it describes. Only exaggeration does that. Only invention packs a bag at the first sign of accountability. Let them go if they need to go. You're not chasing anyone down a road out of town. Their departure isn't a victory you need to celebrate. It's simply confirmation, delivered by their own feet, of exactly how much they believed the story they spent years telling everyone else. Watch closely, and you'll notice the pattern repeats itself in every version of this story, everywhere it happens. The people who talk the most about someone rarely stay the longest once that someone shows up in person. Talk is cheap, precisely because it never has to hold up to a face-to-face conversation. The second it might have to, the talkers disappear, and what's left behind is a town quieter and far more honest than it's been in years. Number 8. What they buried while you were away just rose to the surface with you. Every town has things it prefers to keep underground. Decisions made quietly, favors traded without witnesses, small cruelties excused because the person on the receiving end wasn't there to push back. While you were gone, that town buried a lot more than your name. It buried choices people made, assuming there would never be a reason to answer for them. Your return doesn't dig any of that up directly. It doesn't need to. Guilt has a way of surfacing on its own the second the person it's connected to walks back into view. Faces that used to hold steady start shifting. Old decisions that felt justified in private start feeling exposed in public. None of that requires you to say a single accusing word. It only requires you to exist within eyesight of the people who made those decisions. Think about how unsettling that is for them. They spent years believing time would bury the details for good. Instead, time simply waited, patient and indifferent, for the one variable that would bring it all back up without any effort on your part. That's not you seeking justice. That's consequence, arriving on its own schedule, using your return as nothing more than the excuse it needed to finally show up. You're not responsible for what surfaces. You never buried it in the first place. You're simply present, and presence has a way of loosening what guilt spent years trying to keep packed down tight. Every uncomfortable conversation happening in that town right now, every whispered admission behind closed doors, every person suddenly remembering details they swore they'd forgotten, that's not your doing. That's theirs, finally catching up to them. There's a strange kind of peace in knowing you don't have to dig anything up yourself. The ground does that work when the right person walks back over it. You just have to keep walking. There's an old idea worth remembering here, chosen one. Nothing stays buried forever. It only stays buried until the ground shifts enough to loosen it. Your return is that shift, not because you intended it to be, but because truth simply moves that way when the person it concerns finally comes close enough to disturb the surface it was resting under. Consider how much of what surfaces now was always there, just underneath a surface that looked calm because nobody was pressing on it. That's the thing about buried decisions. They don't disappear with time. They just wait for pressure, and your return applied more pressure in a single afternoon than years of quiet guilt ever could on their own. None of that was your intention. It was simply the natural consequence of the truth finally having somewhere to go. Number 9. The peace they built only worked if you never came back. Every fragile piece has a hidden condition holding it together, and theirs was simple. It only worked as long as you stayed gone, as long as your name stayed a memory instead of a presence, as long as nobody had to look you in the eye and reconcile the version of you they told each other with the version standing in front of them. That's not peace. That's a truce with a single hidden clause nobody wanted to say out loud, because saying it would mean admitting how conditional their comfort actually was. Real peace doesn't require the disappearance of the person it wronged. Real peace survives contact with the truth. Theirs didn't, and the moment you crossed back into town, that condition broke, and everything built on top of it started shaking loose with it. Watch how quickly their composure changes, depending on how close you get. From a distance, they can pretend this is fine, pretend they're simply going about their day, pretend your return is a small, manageable inconvenience. Up close, none of that holds. Up close, they have to actually reckon with a person instead of a story, and reckoning was never part of the plan they built their peace on. You didn't break their peace. You simply revealed how much it depended on you never testing it. That's an important difference, chosen one, because it means none of this is your fault, no matter how many of them try to frame it that way. A structure that collapses the second the excluded person returns was never stable to begin with. It was a performance of stability, and performances end the moment the audience stops cooperating. You're not here to destroy anyone's peace. You're here because you have every right to be, and the fact that your presence alone threatens something they called peace tells you exactly how little peace was ever really there. Real peace doesn't have a hidden clause. It doesn't require certain people to stay away, certain names to stay unspoken, certain doors to stay permanently closed, just to keep functioning. What they had was an arrangement, not peace, and arrangements only hold as long as every party keeps agreeing to the terms. You never agreed to those terms. You were simply never asked, which tells you everything about how much say you were ever supposed to have in the first place. Number 10. Every excuse they gave for what they did to you is standing in the room now. There's a strange thing that happens to an excuse once the person it was made about is standing close enough to hear it. It shrinks. Excuses are built to be spoken behind someone's back, softened by distance, polished by repetition, among people who already agreed with the conclusion before the explanation even started. They were never built to survive being said out loud to the person they were about. Every excuse they made for pushing you out, every justification they repeated to make their own behavior feel reasonable, every version of the story where they were simply protecting themselves from someone difficult, all of it is now standing in the same room as the person it was supposedly protecting them from, and none of it holds the way it used to. You don't have to demand they say it to your face. You don't have to corner anyone into a confession. Just being present is enough to strip the comfort out of every excuse they've been repeating for years. Excuses depend on an absent target. The moment the target isn't absent anymore, the excuse has nowhere left to hide. Watch how quickly conversations change when you're within earshot. Watch how quickly certainty turns into hedging, how quickly "they had it coming" turns into, "well, it was complicated." How quickly a clean story develops all the messy edges it never had when you weren't around to hear it. That's not you forcing a confession. That's an excuse finally being tested against the person it was built to avoid, and failing. This is the part of your return that does the most work without you doing anything at all. You don't need to argue. You don't need to prove anything. You just need to keep standing exactly where you are, and let every excuse they've leaned on for years finally meet the person it was supposed to keep quiet forever. Pay attention to who reaches for a new excuse the fastest once the old one stops working. That's usually the person who invested the most in the original story, the one who needs it to stay true the most because their own comfort depends on it. Watching them scramble for a replacement explanation on the spot tells you something none of their carefully rehearsed words ever could. The truth was never on their side. It just took this long for anyone to be standing close enough to notice. Number 11. Running from you is worse than facing you, and they just learned why. There's a particular kind of fear that makes people run instead of face what's in front of them, and it's almost always worse for the person running than it would have been to simply stay and deal with it. Running keeps the fear alive. It gives it room to grow, unchecked, unchallenged, feeding on every imagined version of what might happen instead of the actual, much smaller reality standing quietly in front of them. Watch the people who chose to run the second word of your return spread through that town. They're not safer than the ones who stayed. They're carrying the same fear with them, except now it travels wherever they go, uninterrupted by the one thing that might have actually settled it, which is simply seeing you, hearing your voice, realizing you never came back with the intention they've spent years assuming you would. Facing you would have cost them a hard conversation. Running from you is costing them peace, sleep, and the ability to walk through their own town without checking the road first. That's not a fair trade, and somewhere underneath the panic, they know it. But panic doesn't make good decisions. Panic makes people choose the option that feels safest in the moment, even when it's the one that guarantees the longest kind of suffering. You're not chasing anyone, you never were. The people running from you are running from a version of this story that exists entirely in their own imagination, built out of years of guilt they never processed and choices they never had to answer for. That version doesn't need your help to keep growing. It grows perfectly well on its own, fed by nothing but distance and silence. Let them run if that's what they choose. You're not required to chase down an explanation they were never willing to hear when you were standing right in front of them the first time. Their running isn't proof of your power. It's proof of exactly how little peace they ever actually had with what they did. Imagine spending years rehearsing what you'd say if this day ever came, only to feel your feet carry you the opposite direction the second it actually arrives. That gap between the person they imagined they'd be and the person who actually showed up when it mattered is the truest measure of how much of their confidence back then was borrowed, not owned. There's an old truth in this that outlasts any single town. The people who run the hardest are usually the ones with the most unfinished business, not the least. Someone with a clean conscience doesn't need to rearrange their whole week around avoiding one person on one street. Only guilt organizes a life around avoidance, that carefully. And every mile they put between themselves and you only stretches that guilt out longer, not shorter. Number 12. The years away weren't exile, they were preparation. Here's the part of this story that belongs entirely to you, chosen one, and has nothing to do with the town's panic at all. They want to believe those years away broke you, wore you down, left you smaller and quieter than the person who walked out. That belief lets them keep their story intact. It lets them imagine your return as some kind of desperate attempt to reclaim something you lost instead of what it actually is. Those years weren't a punishment you were serving. They were the space you needed to become the version of yourself standing in that town right now, calm in a way that used to take effort, steady in a way that used to require convincing yourself. Nobody handed you that. You built it, slowly, deliberately, far away from the noise of a town that never gave you the room to build it while you were still there. Think about what it means that you didn't need their permission to grow. You didn't need their applause, their forgiveness, or their invitation back in. You simply lived, learned, and became someone who could walk back through that gate without flinching. And that alone should tell you everything about how much power they actually had over your story in the first place. Very little, less than they ever wanted to admit. They call it your comeback. You know it was never a comeback in the way they mean it. You didn't come back to reclaim a place at their table. You came back as someone who no longer needs their table to know their own worth. And that distinction is exactly why your presence unsettles them more than anger ever could. Anger would have told them they still mattered to you. Calm tells them they don't, not in the way they assumed they always would. The years away weren't exile, they were the forge. And whatever walked back through that gate isn't the same person they pushed out. That's the part they're only just beginning to understand, and it's far too late for them to do anything about it now. Somewhere in that town right now, someone is trying to reconcile the version of you they remember with the version standing in front of them, and they can't quite make the two match. That gap between memory and reality is where all of their confusion lives. They kept picturing the person who left. They never accounted for who that person would become, given enough time, enough distance, and enough silence to build something they never had to negotiate for. If this message is hitting exactly where it needs to, Chosen One, drop another 77 in the comments so this message knows you're still here, still standing in it with us. And if you want to keep messages like this reaching the people who need their own return story told, a super thanks goes a long way in keeping this mission alive. Number 13. This isn't revenge. This is the town finally seeing clearly. Let's be honest about what's actually happening here, because it matters. This isn't about punishing anyone. It isn't about making people suffer for what they did or didn't do while you were gone. You don't need revenge, and chasing it would only hand them a new story to tell about you, one where you came back bitter instead of whole. That's not the story you're living. What's actually happening is simpler and far more permanent than revenge could ever be. The town is finally seeing clearly, for the first time in years, exactly who they excluded, exactly what that exclusion cost them, and exactly how little control they actually had over the outcome they were so sure they'd secured. That clarity is uncomfortable. It's supposed to be. Clarity always is, for people who built their comfort on staying blind. You don't have to lift a finger to keep that clarity coming. It arrives on its own, in every conversation that gets awkward when your name comes up, in every excuse that shrinks the second it's tested against reality, in every locked door and packed bag and emergency meeting that never quite finds its footing. None of that is punishment. It's simply the truth, finally allowed to move at its own pace, instead of the pace they controlled for years. There's a difference between wanting people to suffer and simply refusing to shrink yourself so they can stay comfortable. You're doing the second one. You're not performing forgiveness you don't feel, and you're not performing cruelty you don't want either. You're just present, unbothered, and completely unwilling to make this easier for anyone who made things so hard for you. That's not revenge, Chosen One. That's boundaries with a face they finally have to look at. And nothing in that town is ever going to feel quite the same now that it's happened. There's a difference worth holding on to here too, Chosen One, between wanting people to change and needing them to suffer in order to feel settled yourself. You don't need either. You already have what actually matters, which is the freedom to walk through that town without needing a single one of them to say a word to you. Whatever they choose to do with the clarity your presence handed them is entirely on their own timeline now, not yours. It's worth naming something honestly here, because this format loves to talk about enemies and victories. But real growth was never about becoming someone's nightmare. It's about becoming someone who no longer needs anyone else's discomfort to feel whole. If clarity happens to unsettle people who spent years avoiding it, that's on the years they spent avoiding it, not on you simply choosing to exist without shrinking yourself for their comfort anymore. Number 14. The version of you they prepared for never actually existed. Here's something worth sitting with, Chosen One, before we close this out. Every plan that town made for your return, every rehearsed line, every locked door, every emergency meeting, all of it was built to handle a version of you that was never real. They imagined someone returning bitter, loud, hungry for a confrontation they could point to and use as proof they'd been right about you all along. That person doesn't exist, never did. What they got instead is harder to prepare for than anything they imagined, because you can build a defense against anger. You can rehearse a response to accusations. You cannot rehearse a response to someone who simply doesn't need anything from you anymore. That's the version of you standing in their town right now, and it's the one variable none of their planning ever accounted for, because it never occurred to them that the person they pushed out might come back complete without them. Think about how much of their fear was actually fear of a fiction, a story they told themselves so many times it started to feel like a threat, when the real person behind it was simply living a life far away from them, growing in directions they never got to witness or take credit for. The gap between the villain they invented and the person who actually walked back through that gate is where all of their panic is currently living, and it has nowhere else to go. There's something almost merciful about that, even if none of them would ever call it that. You could have come back exactly as furious as they feared, and honestly, most people would have understood if you had. Instead, you came back as proof that surviving something doesn't require becoming the thing that hurt you. That's a harder truth for them to sit with than any anger could have been, because anger they know how to defend against. Peace they never learned how to argue with. You don't owe them the version of yourself they prepared for. You never did. You get to keep being exactly who you became in those years away, calm, deliberate, and completely unwilling to perform the anger they were counting on to justify everything they told themselves. That refusal alone is doing more to unravel their story than any confrontation ever could, and it's costing you absolutely nothing to let it keep happening. Number 15. The town will never be the same, and neither will they. Here's where this settles, chosen one. Whatever happens next in that town isn't really your responsibility to manage. You didn't ask any of this to happen the way it did. You simply walked back through a gate that was always yours to walk through, at a pace that was always yours to set, and let the consequences fall exactly where they were always going to fall, once the truth had room to move again. The town will talk about this for a long time. Not because you gave a speech, not because you demanded anything, but because your return did something 100 confrontations never could have. It removed the one condition their entire comfort depended on, and nothing they build after this will ever feel quite as certain as what they had before. That's not cruelty. That's simply what happens when a false peace meets the truth it was built to avoid. You get to walk away from this exactly the way you walked into it, whole, unbothered, and completely unconcerned with whether they ever managed to rebuild whatever they thought they had. That's the part they'll never fully understand. You didn't come back needing anything from them. You came back because it was always your right to, and their panic was never something you were responsible for managing. Let the doors stay locked. Let the rumors run out of road to travel. Let the excuses keep shrinking every time they're tested against the truth. None of that requires anything further from you. You already did the only thing that mattered. You showed up as exactly who you became, and let that be enough. Years from now, people in that town will still be telling the story of the day you walked back through the gate, and every version of it will be missing the one detail that actually mattered most. You never raised your voice. You never asked for anything. You simply stopped shrinking, and that was enough to change everything around you without changing a single thing about who you are. Whatever that town chooses to do from here, rebuild honestly or keep pretending nothing happened, that choice belongs to them now, not to you. You already walked through the gate. You already proved the map was wrong. Every chapter after this one is theirs to write, and for the first time in a long time, you get to watch it unfold from a place that doesn't require their approval, their apology, or their permission to matter. If this story found you at the right moment, chosen one, that's not an accident. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't yet, and drop your own 77 in the comments to mark this as the moment your own return started making sense. Thank you for spending this time with us, chosen ones. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care and goodbye.